often we're taught to stop complaining, just stop complaining, but we should be old enough to bear disappointment. And many families establish the unwritten rule that we don't complain about hard things.
Can you imagine not being able to say that doesn't work for me? And actually, that's a reality. In many of us, we believe that we can't do that. The most courageous person is someone that comes to me and says, "You hurt me." That's hard for me to hear, but boy, am I grateful, because it means that the relationship matters to them. Have you ever longed to be able to talk about values and morals or faith and spirituality without feeling judged? Hi, and welcome to our podcast, Mindful Moments, Insights to Empower the Soul. This podcast will empower you to embrace your true self. Hi, I'm Dr. Debi Gilmore.
And I'm Sharilyn Grain. We are marriage and family therapists and humans with a passion for personal growth and well-being.
Today we're going to talk about the process of communicating effectively, but I don't want anyone listening to think that this is the cliche. If you say it right, it will make your communication deeper and better. We're going to talk about communicating for closeness, to deepen the conversations. It's an art, and it's an art that needs to be mastered and requires practice and refinement and consistency. Those are all hard things, but there's a reward when we're willing to do that. So think about it. Those that seem to be able to command an audience and it's easy and graceful, we're drawn to those who can turn an otherwise drab conversation into one that we want never to end. So some people just have a gift. They seem to be able to tell a story with such finesse that the crafting of words makes us imagine that we're there. We truly believe we are there.
Yeah, and you're talking about kind of the fun part of communication, but this has to be applied to those difficult conversations that involve topics that are challenging or discussions about relationship issues. And these types of conversations can escalate quickly and end up reinforcing the negative patterns that we already have in place. This is something we do in our work every day, isn't it, Debbie? We identify these negative patterns and cycles that all of us get into. It's so easy to do that. And when this happens, it can cause even more tension, more emotional hurt, and create, sadly, greater distance in a relationship. William Edward Norris said this, and I love this: "If your lips can keep from slips, 5 things observe with care: to whom you speak, of whom you speak, and how, when, and where."
Isn't that the most beautiful quote? And it carries all the key things in one sentence. So the process of communicating for closeness really requires an understanding of the right tools and intentional steps along the way. But I want to pause and just point out, tension will happen. We will get stuck. I see it all the time with the couples that are actually improving and getting stronger and closer, and they master this. And then they come back the next week and go, "We slipped." And I say to them, "Of course you did. What did you do about it?" So those that work at it become masters and artists and experience richer connections with associates, friends, and loved ones. So this across the board will bless. If you can learn these skills and practice them, you will improve every aspect of all your relationships. So deeper communication involves lots of aspects in our daily life, including 3 things that we're going to talk about right now: the art of listening, the hardest part of communication; the art of complaining, yes, it needs to be okay; and the art of being able to validate someone else's feelings. Using these 3 basic concepts is a great launch into the mastery of the art of nurturing our most important relationships.
Yes, and I'm so excited I get to talk about the first one, the art of listening, because I feel so, you're laughing because I feel so deeply about this. I just think the world needs more good listeners. It is the hardest part of conversations, and it's truly an art and a skill that has to be practiced and learned. And it's, as we know, it's the most difficult part of this. So we can really easily convey information in the process of telling each other what we think or feel about a certain topic or situation. That's the easiest part. But the challenge for most of us is to be able to briefly set aside our assumptions, our opinions, our thoughts, and listen intently to what someone else has to say about the topic or situation. Typically, while one person in the conversation is sharing their point of view, of course, what are we all doing? We're actively and internally formulating our comeback. We're so focused on what we're going to say next that we've lost completely the presence that is so valuable in a conversation of deep listening. And so without even realizing it, we're focusing so deeply on our own perspective, we ignore the persons or persons that are participating in the conversation. It's difficult, if not impossible, to have a rich exchange of information if one or both of us are disengaged due to our own, thought processes.
What I tell people in the process of listening, because this really is difficult, nobody gets a college course on how to listen. But what I suggest to people is listen for key words, their special words that they're using. Reflect those words back to them, because if you do that, they know that you heard them. And I'll tell you, one of the greatest, most heartwarming compliments I have received is someone said to me, "You're a really good listener." I was stunned by that. It was so sweet to hear that. I hope so. Not always. So the other thing that we get stuck in is the fix. That's where it's a clue that we're not listening. It's a common mistake that we make. That when someone conveys disappointment or suggests there's a problem, we want to quickly find the answer or the fix to take the pain away. It's a human thing. Of course we do. We think this is the first and most important task, but the strategy of a fix backfires. And then we wonder why our suggestion or advice wasn't taken well, and sometimes makes the situation worse. So in most cases, when we are in pain, when we're grieving, when we're experiencing turmoil or a major life challenge, we don't want to fix. What we long for is just someone to be with us in it, to understand or seek greater understanding. Sometimes it's impossible to fully understand, but to hear someone say, "Help me understand your pain," that's incredible. The power of our presence versus the fix can be transformational and so quickly comforting. It is the medicine. It's surprising how often we miss the mark and stumble into the fix.
So true. It's just that simple, isn't it? Instead of the fix, what people need is our presence. I just love that. Part of this skill is to become better at reflective listening. So a good and effective conversation requires specific and intentional steps in order to prepare the way for understanding, for collaboration, and how we feel would be success in any kind of communication process. So an important part of listening is to be able to reflect and respond by repeating the speaker's exact words. And so that's helpful to listen for that. An example is, so you're feeling like we're more distant than ever before. You said to me that you feel lonely and disregarded. Did I get that right? This is the kind of reflective listening that lands so well in people's hearts. And that kind of response indicates that we're truly hearing our partner and verifying that we heard them and that the way that they wanted us to hear them. Another response might be, "I hear you say you were hoping I would answer when you called, but when I didn't answer, you felt confused and disappointed. I'm so sad you felt that way, but I'm really glad that you're telling me." Debbie, there's another kind of listening I just want to add to quick before I just, I've been so inspired by the beloved Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. He has such beautiful teachings on compassionate listening. And he says this about it. He says, deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of another. You listen with only one purpose, to help him or her empty their heart. And even if they say things full of wrong perceptions or bitterness, you can still listen with compassion because you give him or her the chance to suffer less. And then wait for another time to correct them. But for the time being, just listen. And then I love that he says this. And 1 hour like that can bring transformation and healing. Just love his thoughts on compassionate listening.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was a monk and never married, wasn't in a committed relationship, but he had this grasp on love and compassion and validating. And the way that he talks about it, it's the way you convey the reflective listening. You
Mm.
can reflect and be sarcastic and be contemptuous. But the way that you said, I'm so glad you're telling me this, that's sincere. So we also want to make sure that it's how we convey that reflective listening. So let's switch gears and go to the next one, the art of complaining. I hear people say all the time, stop complaining, or I shouldn't complain, so never mind. In every relationship, it has to be what I say legal or okay to complain. When a bee stings us, we say, ouch. Of course we do. It hurt. When our feelings are hurt for whatever reason, it's most productive to be able to say, ouch, that hurt me. And we should feel safe to complain without fear of punishment or repercussions that might follow. Lionel Kendrick said this, and I think this is powerful. The real challenge that we face in our communications with others is to condition our hearts to have concern for the condition of others. So that means when they complain, then we need to say, oh, the condition of your heart is pain. I need to be able to hear you. And he said, this will then warm the hearts of those who may be suffering in silence to allow that complaint.
I love that, Debbie. So the process of communication doesn't always involve happy thoughts, exciting news, and information that's easily digestible. We know that. We know that all relationships involve the difficulties and challenges of daily living. That includes our family life, our work life, our school life, all those kinds of things. And sometimes we avoid talking about these challenges within our relationships because we don't want to disrupt the peace or create tension with our loved ones or friends. But when we're hurt by a loved one, holding on to that hurt, as you said, can only make it worse. We might believe the pain will eventually dissipate and go away, but the pain or discomfort of something sad, regrettable, causes resentment in us, unrest, and that can surface and resurface when triggered by another painful event. Sometimes an event that happened decades ago will even resurface and cloud our ability to find comfort and reassurance from a loved one. It can erode trust, emotional safety, and deeper connection.
And those decades old pains and injuries become blocks in our most important relationships. They become blocks in ourself. So let me clarify the difference between complaining and criticism, because that's often misunderstood. It's useful to understand that these are distinctly different. Some believe that what they call constructive criticism is helpful. And the assumption being that when someone is criticized or corrected, they will be motivated to improve. I don't think so.
Right.
That they might rise up and become stronger and better because we offered criticism. A better term might be corrective feedback.
Yeah, much better term.
Yeah.
And we know that when someone receives feedback in the form of criticism, it's almost always perceived as an attack on, sadly, their value and the imprints on their mind as a negative experience. You know, it's said that when we go on a job review, we might have been given 30 positive observations about our efforts and offerings on that job, but the thing that we'll remember the most is that one single piece of feedback that suggests we didn't quite measure up. You know, I love John Gottman. He says that there have to be 5 positives to every negative, for it to land. That's an astounding ratio to me, and kind of what you're talking about. But if feedback is given and accompanied by ways to improve performance and results, then the person is set up to succeed and leaves feeling like they're valued by their superior, in these jobs hunts and in this example that you've just given. And Debbie, you do a great job of that in our work. So thank you so much.
Well, you are so kind to point that out. Thank you. I thrive on positive feedback. I also appreciate corrective feedback when someone says, that's not working for me. Can we do it differently? It's not, you are bad, you always, you never. So let's talk about what criticism looks like or feels like. It's an attack on the person of who they are. It devalues their worth. An example would be when the feedback is given in absolutes, like, you just never get it right, or I can never count on you. An extreme that we sometimes see in our work is, you are so dumb and I can't believe I trusted you. That's so painful. It's very painful to hear something like that. It hits our heart, not our head. Or something like, you're just plain incapable. It's deflating. So these examples, of course, are extreme, but just to prove the point, to drive the point home, when we become more aware of how we offer feedback, it might be surprising how often these type of extremes actually come from us. We often use absolutes and don't realize it in our assessments of others. So we need to give, here's the word, grace and wiggle room for our person to get it wrong, to try again.
Yes. And whereas complaining is just an observation we've talked about on feedback or behaviors or situations that hurt or disappointing, it has to be legal to complain in any important relationship. And so that's a general rule when we consider the following scenarios. When a bee stings, we say ouch. When a bone breaks, wow, we say more than ouch. When we stumble and skin our knee, that hurts. Somehow in our early lives, often we're taught to stop complaining, just stop complaining. But the general rule is that we should be old enough to bear disappointment. And many families establish the unwritten rule that we don't complain about hard things.
Can you imagine not being able to say that doesn't work for me?
Mm.
And actually, that's a reality in many of us. We believe that we can't do that. The most courageous person is someone that comes to me and says, you hurt me. That's hard for me to hear, but boy, am I grateful, because it means that the relationship matters to them.
Mhm.
So in reality, this causes the incident to be symbolically swept under the rug. So the hurt person or persons are expected to get over it when they can't complain and heal on their own. So it doesn't work that way. Hurt is stuffed. And as we talked about earlier, will only rise up to haunt us later when another hurtful incident, I call it pile on, like in football. It just piles on and the pain gets bigger. The relationship takes a hit, and the persons who were hurt experience greater distance, and emotional walls receive more bricks, the analogy of a brick wall. So the art of complaining involves communicating about the incident in a way that we begin with the impact of the hurtful situation, the ouch. Talk about the emotion that occurred. It hurt me, or I was disappointed, I was confused. And ask for a resolve that's productive and empowering.
And so the art of validation, that's the next thing we want to talk about as we're going through this connecting communication that is so important, especially our intimate relationships. So most people misunderstand that the true meaning or definition of validation has to do with the confirmation of truth or supporting fact. But in this case, we're focusing on the validation of a person and their sense of acceptance and belonging. This type of validation of person, state, or system means to convey or confirm that they and what they have to say are valuable and worthwhile.
So it really means acknowledging and reinforcing someone's value when they're sharing something that we don't necessarily agree to, or maybe is even disturbing. Let me give an analogy. I love teaching with analogies, and this is my favorite because it's such a visual. When we order something of value from a shipper, and let's just imagine that they choose FedEx as the carrier. The shipper typically requires a signature before the box can be released. It's because it's of value, and the shipper doesn't want to lose it in the shipment. So the driver isn't just going to toss the box at the door and leave. Instead, they ring the bell or knock. They ask the receiver to sign on an electric tablet nowadays, and then the item is released only after the signature is given. When that person signs for the box, they're not saying, I love it, I'm going to keep it, it isn't broken, it's the right color, or it's even the correct item. We're saying, I received your box.
Yes. And so similarly, when we're in a conversation with someone, our first task is to sign for their package of information. This isn't a form of agreement for the opinion or the statement being shared. Instead, it's just an acknowledgement of what the person has shared. So, even more effective in the process is to reflect what is heard so the speaker knows that they were heard and validated in their ability to share. So, if we can apply this FedEx analogy to all of our conversations with others, we'll be less likely to feel threatened by the conversation, and we can reasonably expect that our sharing of our own differing viewpoint will be received also with respect and consideration. Can I just add one more thought about the way we can validate and offer truth to someone else? I like to call this the gift of discernment. The ability to validate the truth of others by seeing the good in them. There's a quote I love by Stephen Richards. He says, "The highest type of discernment is that which perceives in others and uncovers for themselves their better natures, the good inherent within them." This is another beautiful way that we can validate people, help them to see the good that we see in them and uncover for themselves.
That term discernment is like sifting. It's to reveal the truth or the good.
Mhm.
I love that word. And I love discussions I've had in the past about what does that really mean? It means focus. It means finding the greater good. And I love that. Okay, so let's give some practical. What does this really look like? Connecting talk. Here's an example that I love. Hey, how are you doing really? Have you ever asked that in a grocery store? No, we say, hey, how are you? And then we walk on.
Mhm.
Hey, are you doing okay? I noticed you've been a bit quiet. I'm here if you want to talk. This is, in my opinion, a beautiful example of connecting talk. It's a style of communication that invites digging deeper. It invites closeness. It invites greater understanding, moments of comfort and clarity. We all need that in our daily life. When couples move into a style of communication that's connecting, like this, the conversation tends to move on a deeper level. Some of us are afraid of that vulnerability, but when you start to cultivate it, healthy communication is one of the most important elements of human relationships. When we don't do this, relationships suffer. So, what we want to do is cultivate this ability to say, I'm here for you. I see that you're struggling with something. Maybe you aren't, but help me understand. When we can do that, the relationship is richer.
I love that, Debbie. There's been times when you've said that to me, "How are you really?" And it means so much when you do it. I feel the power of that question so much in my own personal life. Connecting talk encourages emotional connection. That's just, I love that emotional connection. That's what we all long for. That's what we're all wired to have, is these deep emotional connections with people. And this deeper connection is much more likely if each partner is more open to intimate awareness of both their own and their partner's experience. We know that when couples use connecting talk, they share a fuller range of information. They're able to share their feelings, their desires, the deeper aspects of themselves and their partner's experience, as well as exploring unmet needs together. The challenge is that connecting talk requires vulnerability and authenticity, and that in turn requires courage and a lot of practice.
So, let's point out that when you dive into this connecting talk, it's not going to happen deeply the first time. Maybe it will. Maybe you have a deep experience, but then returning to that is such a challenge. So give yourself wiggle room and patience to just try it on for size. Try a brief connecting moment. Ask one of these powerful questions that we've suggested. Give yourself time to cultivate it and get better at it. It's an art. So let's talk about the positive impact. I mean, this is medicine for a relationship. Connecting talk prompts the couple, you, your partner, us in our most important relationships, prompts us to investigate and understand each other's experience. It really is like getting a shovel out and saying, well, let's dig together. Let's hold on to this handle together. When couples practice and improve connecting talk, the relationship flourishes. There are multiple benefits, both personally, relationally, physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Mhm.
The couple is more likely to find acceptance and to take accountability for their own actions and influence in the relationship. Why? because the relationship is safer. You feel it. And you're more likely to disclose information with honesty because it's safer while feeling that increase in emotional safety. That's the important thing. When we talk about safety, it's about emotional safety. A willingness to be vulnerable, which we've pointed out is hard, sends a positive message to your partner. It increases the likelihood of openness, risk, and really, most importantly, defensiveness and blame are less likely to cloud the relationship and keep you feeling less safe.
So true, Debbie. So let's talk more about the how of this connecting talk. What does it look like? Here's some examples, specific examples of the way that you can incorporate connection in your communication with those closest to you, your most intimate people. So speaking for yourself and not your partner, be careful about that. Owning, I'll say that word again, owning and sharing your own experiences, being able to identify difficult emotions, being able to share your complaints without attacking. We talked a lot about that today. Acknowledging differences. This can be something that brings up defensiveness, but we love to celebrate the differences in each other, and being able to acknowledge those in yourself and in your partner is such an important part of this connecting talk. And then managing escalating emotions. These are all very specific skills that we can practice in this quest to be more connecting in our conversations.
It requires self-awareness. When those emotions hit and we can recognize, okay, I need to take a deep breath. You and I, Sharilyn, in our work, we call it the pause moment or the pause place where we say, oh, hold on, slow down, take a deep breath, because those escalated emotions pick up speed and the volume increases and the safety is gone. So some of the things that you might say to your partner are things like, it's so hard for me when you say be ready in 10 minutes and you're not ready for another half hour. That's quite familiar for probably a lot of people. Another one would be, I'm really struggling with my job and I would like to talk to you about making a career change. That's not an extreme, I'm going to change my career. It's, can we sit down and talk about this struggle that I'm having? It's a lot softer approach and a lot safer. Or I'm willing, notice the word willing, I am willing to take the kids to the park so you can work on your project. Does that work for you? Would that be helpful? A key phrase that works universally is, I really need your help when.
I love that. Just these very specific ideas and ways to do this. So again, we know that connecting talk requires intentional, thoughtful shifts in our daily communication. So we'd love to invite you to consider setting aside a time to practice with your partner. Share things with each other, something about yourself that you may never have shared before. That's really vulnerable to do, but the rewards for the risk can be so life-changing. Try to find something that's safe but personal. Maybe some examples would be a most embarrassing moment, a happy moment that you wish you could experience again, or a time when you are afraid or alone. These are vulnerable places that can make space for that deep connection we're talking about.
So imagine that you've identified a moment where you can sit down and try this connecting talk. Here's some ideas of questions you might ask or things that you might say. Please help me understand. Or what would you like me to better understand? That's interesting, isn't it? It's different. Not just help me understand. What is it that you'd like me to understand about this situation? It's more focused. Do you know what I just learned from you? I love using that one. Let me tell you what I just learned. That's reflective listening in a deeper way. Or I'm wondering if you could tell me about the most difficult part of your day. Not what was good about your day. Let's just talk about the good stuff. What was hardest? What's the heaviest thing on your heart right now? That might be an alarming question. But then when you realize, wait, no, I really want to know what's the heaviest thing on your heart right now?
I love these questions. Can I just add a few more? When was the last time you felt joy and what was it like for you? Something like that that's joyful and just a remembrance of a time when something was joyful for your partner. Can I tell you what my favorite thing is about you? What would that be like to have somebody say that to you? Can I just tell you what I love about you, what my favorite thing is? I just love that. Another one is, what is the most important thing you've learned recently? You know, we're all thinking about what we're learning in life, and to have someone inquire about that, be interested in that is so, so precious, so validating, so connecting. Another question, when you feel sad, what do you do to cope? You know, what do you do to cope when you're sad? That's another great question. And then finally, I'm actually really curious about what your top 5 core values are in life. I find that sometimes we haven't slowed down in life long enough to even identify that in ourselves, let alone someone close to us. And that can be such a powerful conversation to understand what the core values are in someone's life that we love. So we can share and discuss what it was like to hear about our partner's experience or responses, what was surprising about their response, what was it like to share your memories with your partner, and how can we incorporate connecting talk in our daily communication? We can start to notice how it brightens people's day and strengthens our relationship with our sweethearts.
You know, something as I was listening to your ideas of questions, I was thinking disclosure changes the relationship.
Mm.
So you might even try something like, let me tell you what I do when I feel sad. This is what I usually do to cope. What do you do to cope when you're sad? So that disclosure opens it up in a different way. So it brings us to the therefore what? Therefore what? We gave an abundance of information today, but my therefore what is I need to commit to be more vulnerable, to be willing to be more vulnerable. I tend to withdraw when I get sad or when things get hard. I tend to want to shut down and not disclose. I'm a very private person. And yet, in my work, I invite people to be vulnerable all the time. So, my therefore what is personally to work on being more vulnerable with my partner, with my committed relationships, with people that matter to me, with that reciprocal sharing.
Wow, I love the vulnerability of what you just expressed saying that, Debbie. It just makes me love you more. What you just did was so connecting for me to you. Just that vulnerability and wanting to do that better. Thank you so much. And I think I'm walking away. I'm just always so impressed with Thich Nhat Hanh and his counsel to be a deeper, more compassionate listener. And so I hope to do a better job of letting people unburden their hearts and suffer less as I listen to them. That's my therefore what.
Oh, these are great. You know, when we do this, I forget to write these down. I need to write down my therefore what. And I'm going to invite all of our listeners to do that. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you will follow us. We're hoping that our content is rich and that you will reach out and give us ideas of topics that you would like to have discussed.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us today. It means the world to have you here with us. Thank you.